All right, well, hello, everybody. Just a brief introduction of our agenda for tonight. The meeting is now being recorded. Tonight's meeting is another virtual Planning Commission meeting. I understand to Commissioner Cullen's question, I just got word from our trustee moderator that yes, the city of Belleville is doing their meetings hybrid, but for right now, Van Buren Township is still doing our meetings virtually for the time being, and that's all of our regular board and commission meetings. So the same goes for tonight's meeting. So anybody present can attend and participate by raising your virtual hand, using the chat function, or using the *9. This meeting, of course, is being held virtually to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 and consistency with the Public Act 2020 number 254, a declaration of a health emergency. The agenda for tonight involves a fairly typical type of request, a preliminary site plan review for an undeveloped site off of Schooner Drive, as well as maybe less typical item, which is a discussion of the Sumter Road Corridor Master Plan. The last time the Planning Commission got together, along with other members of the community, was at the July 28th Sumter Road Corridor workshop for the Sumter Road Corridor Master Plan. So we're going to go over some of the input from that meeting and some direction in a few focus areas from that master plan effort. But with no further ado, I'll turn this agenda over to our chair, Carol Thompson. Thank you.
Director Power. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Charter Township of Van Buren Planning Commission meeting for Wednesday, September 8th of 2021. We'll start with a roll call, please. Ms. Harmon.
Jeff Jar.
Here.
Brian Cullen.
Here.
Kelly Barr.
Here.
Brian Kelly is excused. Medina Atchison.
Here.
Sherry Budd.
Here.
Carol Thompson.
Here. Thank you. We have a revised agenda before us. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Madam Chair, I move to accept the revised agenda, noting the change to site location in new business item number 1.
Great. Thanks, Commissioner Jar. Is there support?
I'll support.
Thanks, Commissioner Cullen. Any questions or changes? The roll call vote, please.
Kelly Barr.
I accept.
Medina Atchison.
Yes.
Sherry Budd.
Yes.
Brian Cullen.
Yes.
Jeff Jar.
Yes.
Carol Thompson.
Yes. So the agenda is approved. We'll move right to our first item to approve the minutes from our regular meeting of July 14th of 2021. Is there a motion to approve the July 14th minutes?
Through the chair, I move we approve the minutes of the regular meeting of July 14th, 2021.
Thanks, Commissioner Budd. Support, please.
I'll support.
Thanks, Commissioner Cullen. Any changes or correction on the minute? Hearing none, a roll call vote, please.
Sherry Budd.
Yes.
Medina Atchison.
Yes.
Kelly Barr.
Yes.
Brian Cullen.
Yes.
Jeff Jar.
Yes.
Carol Thompson.
Yes. All right. Agenda approved, minutes approved. Our first item under new business is the JSB Builders LLC. Sam Patel, on behalf of JSB Builders LLC, has applied to construct a 16,280 square foot multi-tenant light industrial building with truck well and related site improvements. The location, the site located to the south of 6032 Schooner Drive has a tax parcel identification number of V83-018-99-0003-708, and it is zoned M1, which is light industrial district, with a total area of 4,478 acres. The site is located on the west side of Schooner Drive, which is located south side of Michigan Avenue between Beck and Denton Road. And I'll first go to Director Powers to bring us up to date before we hear from the applicant.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a small note that's the 4.478 acre site near the south end on the west side of Schooner Drive. This is a industrial building that is intended to be built for several potential tenants. And I think we can make the best use of our time by just going right into the zoning and planning comments from our planning consultant, and then to the township engineer. And then I can summarize the fire department's comments, and then we can open this up to questions from the board and discussion from the applicant. So I'll go ahead and defer to Vidya Krishnan for planning and zoning comments.
Thank you, Director Power. Members of the commission, as was mentioned, we have reviewed a request from JSB Builders LLC to construct a 16,280 square foot multi-tenant light industrial building in an M1 zoned district on Schooner Drive. The plan proposes the use of only the northern 1/3 portion of the site, and approximately 2/3 in the southern portion of the site is labeled as future development area. The applicant did mention at a staff meeting that they have plans for possibly an identical building in the southern half in the future at some point of time. They're not being held to it, but their intent is to have another multi-tenant building in the future portion that is labeled on your plans. All of the information required for site plan, basic information, is on the plans. The proposed building complies with the required setbacks and the maximum permitted building height for the M1 district. With regard to location of curb cuts, the plan proposes a single new curb cut of Schooner Drive, which is intended for two-way movement of vehicles and is 35 foot wide. Director Power, if we could have the site plan on the screen, it would be easier to follow along. With the proposed building and the future development, the site is likely to receive frequent truck traffic, and the applicant has submitted truck turning diagrams which show that they can make the maneuvering movements around the site. Typically, we do require cross-access between sites. We had asked the applicant to provide cross-access, and they have stated that cross-access is not shown at this time. However, if you look at the plan at the southwest portion of the site, they do have a little stub that is intended as a turnaround for trucks, but in the future, it could possibly serve as a common access drive that would go around the future development that is on that site. We believe that could serve as a cross-access connection point to the undeveloped portion of the site. The plan proposes a new 5 foot wide concrete sidewalk along the site's Schooner Drive frontage, and also a sidewalk on the front of the building on the south side, providing access to individual units. A sidewalk connection is also shown on the plan from the sidewalk in front of the building to the sidewalk along Schooner Drive. Per the ordinance requirement, a concrete curb is proposed at the edge of all paved areas. All of the parking spaces on the site meet the minimum dimension requirements set forth by the ordinance and are double striped. The number of parking spaces required for the site is 35, and the plan does provide for the required number of spaces. One minor correction is on the northwest corner of the site. There are actually 6 spaces. The plan incorrectly labels it as 7 spaces. It's just a typographical error. There are 2 handicap accessible spaces shown, which is adequate for a parking lot with under 50 spaces. With regard to loading, the site requires one 10 foot by 50 foot loading space. A 14 foot by 60 foot truck well is shown on the bottom of your screen, which would be the west side of the building. The plan still does not address where the other tenant spaces will park. The owner who is building this site is actually going to be occupying the corner suite, and the truck well is for use of his business. It is unclear where loading will be provided for the other tenant spaces, which is the other lease spaces, if they want to use loading or unloading. The applicant has written on the plan, each tenant space will have its own overhead door for panel or straight truck deliveries. Provisions have to be made to allow sharing of the truck well, but this is not anticipated. We are not really sure what the statement means. I mean, the truck well is located on the west end of the building. Not sure how the truck well will serve a tenant space that is closer to Schooner Drive. So it is likely the applicant will have to stripe additional loading spaces along the rear drive aisle, which is on the north side of the site, and make note that such deliveries will not cause any conflicts in circulation on the site. With regard to landscaping, the ordinance has several criteria and categories for which landscaping needs to be provided. The most important of them is frontage landscaping along Schooner Drive. At this time, the applicant has included frontage landscaping only for the portion of the site to be developed. The area that is labeled future development area on the south side does not have any trees. We don't have a problem with deferring the trees as long as the applicant has a proposed timeline or at least an idea of when such development will take place. If such development is not going to take place in the next 3, 5, or 10 years, there are really no existing trees along that frontage either. It's very sparse. There would be no reason not to provide the frontage landscaping for the entire frontage of the site. Even if the site to the south were to be developed in the future, it is possible to preserve those trees. Those trees would not need to be knocked down just in order to develop the site. So some clarification is needed with regard to what the applicant's intent for this parcel is. The required landscaping for the parking lot has been provided. The loading space has to be screened, and a loading space has not been shown along for any of the other tenant spaces, but the truck well that is shown on the west side is screened by the landscaping along the west property line. Now, greenbelt buffering is one of the significant requirements of the site. Now, the ordinance requires, since the site abuts single-family residential development to the west, Director Power, if you could scroll to the landscaping plan, that would help. Since it abuts a single-family residential district to the west, the ordinance requires the provision of a 60-foot wide green belt built as a berm with double staggered row of evergreen trees. That is the requirement between an industrial and a single-family residential district. Even though the single-family homes are a significant distance away from that property line, it still borders technically an R1 district on that side. In order to provide ample circulation around the building, the applicant really doesn't have room to do that. So they have proposed only a 45-foot wide green belt, and there is no detail provided whether this area is going to be bermed as required by the ordinance. We had previously recommended that the green belt be widened, but we can see that that is not going to be feasible, allowing for circulation. So in exchange for the Planning Commission granting a narrower green belt with double staggered evergreen rows, we would recommend that the Planning Commission require either a screen wall, a masonry screen wall, or a fence along the west property line to meet the screening intent of the ordinance. The open space landscape areas have been landscaped as required by the ordinance. The site requires a tree removal permit because trees are going to be removed. Per the summary, there are a total of 79 trees, of which 36 trees are non-regulated and 43 trees are regulated. Of the 43 trees, 7 are proposed for removal and replacement. Now, if you look at the tree survey for this project, they have counted several trees that are not even located on their property. They are actually located on the property to the west or to the south. You cannot include off-site trees within your tree counts or remove off-site trees. Only trees that are located on your own site can be removed. Should the need for removal of any off-site trees be required because of grading on the site, permission needs to be obtained from the neighboring property owner for such removal. It's also a little difficult to see which are these trees that are being preserved because the tree survey has got a list, but the numbers are not noted on the actual survey itself. So flipping between multiple sheets to try and figure out which is the tree that's proposed for saving is a little difficult. It would possibly be easier for the applicant to just superimpose those 2 layers in their files so that we can clearly see which trees are going to be crossed out and removed and which trees are being preserved. Stormwater detention, we defer to the township engineer to ensure conformance to the requirements of Wayne County and the township. With regard to lighting, 3 different types of wall-mounted fixtures are proposed. The site plan notes that no pole-mounted fixtures are proposed at this time. Now, if you look at all of the other industrial developments on Schooner Drive, which would be Contractor Steel, Mazer Polymer, any of the other ones, they all have a single 15-foot tall light pole at the main access drive. This helps identify the entrance in the event of a fire or other emergency, when it is dark and a fire truck is coming, it helps to identify the turn of the access drive rather than cross it and realize the building has got lights and you need to turn in there. So for the sake of visibility and improved safety of the site itself, we recommend that one light pole be installed at the entrance access drive, similar to all the other parcels on Schooner. The applicant has provided building elevations. The building will be constructed of metal siding, decorative block, and standing seam metal roof. While the ordinance does not have specific architectural requirements for industrial buildings in this area, Planning Commission has consistently required higher quality building materials and looks for all structures within the township. We understand that this is a multi-tenant industrial building, but we continue to recommend that the applicant consider adding either a banding of a different material or a different color on the building, or add decorative block to the facade that faces Schooner Drive. It's a very small facade. That's the east elevation. It's facing Schooner Drive. If they could increase the amount of masonry proposed or make it more of a decorative block, instead of giving it a warehouse appearance from Schooner Drive, that would definitely work towards the Planning Commission's vision for industrial buildings within the township. The plan notes a dumpster enclosure in the northwest corner of the site, and details have been noted meet the ordinance standards. The applicant has shown a monument sign along the site's Schooner Drive frontage, and a wall sign will be provided for each tenant. Prior to installation of any wall sign, they will require administrative approval from the township prior to installation. We have gone over these plans with the applicant several times, especially as related to stormwater detention issues, since it's part of a larger industrial park. At this time, we believe many of the site plan related items have been addressed, but some significant issues still remain to be addressed. The applicant was hopeful to get preliminary and final site plan approval from the Planning Commission in one step. However, we believe with the number of outstanding items, it would not be prudent to go and grant site plan approval in one step, because some of these do require feedback from the Planning Commission for revisions to the plan. So at this time, it would be our recommendation that the Planning Commission approve the preliminary site plan only, subject to the 10 conditions that are noted in our review letter dated August 30th. I would be happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Krishnan, for your thorough review. I think we'll hold our questions until after we hear the other report. So let's go to Fishbeck and their recommendation. Mr. Kamer.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair and the Commission. As Ms. Krishnan mentioned, we've gone over these plans a couple times with the applicant, really determining, what needs to be done, and in order to get preliminary site plan approval based on engineering comments, and then what will need to be done in the future in order to receive engineering approval or final site plan approval based on engineering acceptance. So I'm going to go through our letter for some of the comments that we have related to our September 1st letter. The preliminary site plan, which was submitted to the township for preliminary approval for the JSB building, was examined by Fishbeck, and per usual at this time, we are looking at feasibility of the engineering aspects of the site design and don't conduct a full engineering review until the engineering application is submitted. I won't go through the specifics of the site, as Ms. Krishnan already went through the building, the size, and the parking lot. To dive into some of our general comments, there are some minor pieces that did not get included as part of the site plan that we like to see, which are listed on under the general comments of our letter. But one of the major issues that we noticed and what we like to see is that the existing topo survey seems to be incomplete. There are no contours or elevations indicated along the western property line of the parcel. This looks to be an existing swale that flows south towards the existing drain on the property, but it does not have detailed grades to show if that is actually correct. In addition to this, the overland stormwater flow route that's indicated on sheet C102 doesn't match the flow indicated on the contours on the site. So we would like the applicant to provide the overland flow arrows and combine the topo with their overland flow route so that it is clear to the engineers, the township, and the commission as to the existing flow over the site prior to anything being constructed on the site. In addition to this, we'd like the 100-year floodplain elevation indicated on the site plan, if it is indeed on the site, and as well as typical sections for pavement, parking lots, sidewalks. All of these cross sections showing the pavement details need to be included when they submit for final site plan approval. Moving on to the water main service. The existing GIS records show that there is a publicly owned 12-inch ductile iron running north and south along the east side of Schooner Road, and a publicly owned 8-inch ductile iron service that services the property to the north. The applicant is proposing servicing their property with an 8-inch water main connecting to the 12-inch on the east side of Schooner. They're proposing 2 hydrants and a 2-inch copper type K water service line to the building. Our comments on their water main plan. The applicant needs to work with the fire marshal, and I believe Director Power will go over that, his comments, but work with the fire marshal and the engineer to finalize the location of the hydrants. There's a proposed hydrant that they're installing. There's a hydrant that they're proposing to install on the east side of Schooner Road that we think is unnecessary. And we believe that they could move the proposed hydrant on the south side of the property a little bit further north and can work in conjunction with the existing hydrant that's on site to provide full coverage to the building, rather than adding more hydrants than need within a building footprint of this size. Other minor comments, the water main should have a minimum of 6 feet of cover under non-paved areas and a minimum of 7 feet of cover over paved areas. And the other the connection to the existing water main, which goes under Schooner Drive, is proposed to be done with a directional bore, but the profile and the design of this really needs some work. It doesn't showcase or indicate that what they're proposing is actually a feasible design. I think it can be done, but not in the manner that they're showing it. So they need to kind of go back and really detail out how they plan on crossing underneath Schooner Drive. With that said, there is water main service within reachable distance on this site, so I don't see any major issue with them finalizing and putting together a feasible and good water main service plan on the site once they resubmit for engineering. To go over the sanitary comments, same thing goes with the sanitary. There is a 10-inch reinforced concrete sanitary sewer that runs now on the west side of Schooner Drive. And the applicant is proposing to connect to this using a 6-inch PVC sanitary service connection to the 10-inch service or 10-inch publicly owned township sewer along Schooner Drive. One of the comments that we have is that the applicant needs to maintain the proper horizontal and vertical separation between both the sanitary service and the other utilities that they're crossing on site. And that goes for storm, water, gas, and electric. Just minor issues that need to be worked out in their final site plan. Okay, so then the big question, and I know Ms. Krishnan mentioned it as part of her review, is the stormwater and stormwater management. to give everybody a little bit of a background information, as we've been talking and discussing with the applicant, the plans have never indicated a stormwater detention or retention system. And it has been the stance or I'm not sure stance is the right word, but the approach of the applicant has been that this entire schooner development was once, or at least this west side of the schooner development was once put into the entire developmental stormwater management and detention system, like a global system for the whole development. And as part of our early reviews, what we wanted the applicant to do is submit, as part of the property deed, this stormwater management agreement that showed that this entire site, along with other sites along Schooner Drive, actually do discharge into this global system that has taken into account the development of these sites. Our first comment on the letter reads that there is no indication of a stormwater detention system, and that the applicant has indicated an on-site storage system, or that an on-site stormwater detention system is not required per the property deed restrictions and the design of the Schooner Road detention system. Now, the applicant has submitted to Wayne County, apparently, the reference documents that show that this stormwater detention system indeed was approved by Wayne County. We did receive, as part of their response letter, a approval from OHM, who is the now Wayne County consultant that is doing their stormwater management, that does indicate that the stormwater system as shown on site is approved by Wayne County. However, we have not seen any of this information. So we would like the applicant to provide these reference documents that exempts them and the site from stormwater detention requirements for the township to review. We just need to make sure that everything that was previously approved is still approved, and that the applicant does indeed fall under this category. With that in mind, once the applicant submits this, there is a little bit of work to be done with their stormwater system on site. The stormwater design for the system must have a minimum cover of 4 feet for the storm sewers where possible. If anything less than 4 feet is requested, we can look to it on a case-by-case basis, and it can get approved by the engineers and the township directors. But we need the applicant to do their due diligence to try to keep these storm sewers at a level per the engineering standards manual. With that said, once we get all this information and once they resubmit for engineering, we will do a full stormwater review prior to giving any approval for that. Other than that, with that, on the west side of the property, and I know, Dan, you had shown, or in the landscape plans, they do show this berm on the west side of the property with some trees on it. This kind of goes back to their topographic survey, which seems a bit incomplete. It seems as though there is water and there is a swale coming from the northern property that is not being picked up from along the west side of the property, that we would like to see the applicant pick up this water in the existing ditch or swale and extend this down further through the system. Currently, I think there's 5 or 6 trees planted in the area of where this swale would take water. So we would like to see that. Yeah, and actually it's a little bit north of that, Dan. If you go to maybe the landscape plan, it's along the parking lot there where their contours kind of end. But when you look at the actual topographic survey or look at the site, it appears that a swale just disappears. Yes, right over there. So if you see all those contour lines on the kind of left side of the trees up there, from our investigation, that seems to be a swale that comes from the northern property and drains along the western side of the property. Whereas you can see how the contours just kind of end. And that, we believe, is a swale for drainage from the north that needs to be conveyed all the way through the property and all the way to the south. So with that, there are just some things that, as far as stormwater is concerned, that we'd like to see tightened up a bit. But again, with everything else on this site, we believe there is feasibility to make this site work with a little bit of extra effort and detail. We see no issue with their stormwater design at this time. Other than that, there are some minor comments with soil erosion and some truck movements. We'd like to see a little bit more detail, but in general, this being a preliminary site plan approval, we offer no objection and would recommend the Planning Commission approve preliminary site plan approval, not final site plan approval, based on our review of the township's engineering standards. With that, that is all that we have, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Mr. Kamer. Very helpful points. Good review. I think I'd like to ask Director Power to give us the Fire Marshal Linehan's report, and then we can open it up for discussion, questions, and hear from the applicant. Director Power?
Yes, thank you. So Fire Marshal Linehan did have some conditions that were met and some conditions that remain. I'll summarize the conditions that remain. There's a comment about the address numbers needing to be provided on the street side of each building, that they shall be visible from the street and of contrasting colors. We're required by the fire code official. The address identification needs to be provided in additional locations to facilitate the emergency response. No part of any buildings or structures shall be more than 250 feet from a fire hydrant. That ties in with some of the comments from Mr. Kamer about the finalizing the location of the hydrants. One fire hydrant located on Schooner Drive is shown on the plans. An additional hydrant needs to be installed on the northeast side of the building. There's a comment that an approved water supply capable of supplying the needed fire flow must be provided for all new buildings. And then with respect to some building access and communication comments, there needs to be a E-lock Knox box installed for access by the fire department. There needs to be an emergency responder radio coverage system that's required unless it can be proven after the building is constructed and occupied that coverage is sufficient. And then some general comments about the necessary construction drawings, schedules, as-built documents, details, and a digital CAD layout of the site being required at the time when the site is built. So these are some comments that I'm sure will carry over into the final review step of this project. So that is all from the fire marshal. And at this time, the applicant is here. I know we have Mr. Sam Patel and Scott Wright on the call. They are available to discuss their project.
Great. Let's go to the applicant and see what they want to tell us, any responses that they have to the recommendations that have been made this evening. Gentlemen.
Good evening, commissioners and staff members. My name is Sam Patel. I'm owner of the JSB Builder and USA Bearing Supplies. Let me give you a couple backgrounds of my business. Currently, my business is located in Ann Arbor, Michigan. We have a warehouse at 2,400 square foot, and our intent to build the bigger warehouse, extend the business at the Van Buren Township. So out of 16,000 square foot, we have intents to use almost 50 to 60% space for my business, and we do basically manufacturings and overseas and distribution here for the ball bearings and the linear bearings, as well as the oil seals and CNC machines. So currently we have two full-time employees and one part-time employees. As we bring and extend our business, we have intents to bring more employment for the 2 more full-time employees. And the remaining space we're going to lease to the M1 light industrial tenants, potential tenants. So this is the basic concept of the business. I would like to add anything as far as the other land, which is we have intends to build in the next 2 years as economy goes, and how our business can grow. So we have intends to build similar kind of buildings and open space, which is 2/3 of the 4.4 acres. So as of right now, I like to add any questions, comments for my civil engineer and architecture.
Great, thank you so much. Mr. Wright?
Get unmuted. Good evening, everybody.
Hello.
So yes, we've been working on this through all of last year and everything going on. We don't have any big issues. We obviously will work with Mr. Powers and the planner to address the items in their letter. Our engineer will work with your engineer to address the concerns, and we will provide all the information in the township that we provided to the county to gain their approval for the stormwater system. So Mr. Patel bought this property with the understanding that he didn't have to do detention. Of course, I don't know if there's any real estate agents sitting among us, but sometimes we understand that things can be stretched a little bit. But we do have all the documentations, and we even got documentation when Wayne County approved it. From Wayne County. It took them a bit, but we got our hands on it. So we do have all that information, and we will provide it with the application to the township for a thorough review. We will address all the issues and get them obviously revised and updated drawings, and we just like to get our preliminary approval so we can move on to the next and final step, hopefully, aside from construction.
Great, thank you so much. I'll ask the Planning Commission at this point if they have questions or comments for the applicant, for staff, or for our consultant. Anyone?
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Jar?
I have a question for Ms. Krishnan. Your concern about the truck dock and the loading, is your concern more of a labeling and parking lot striping for the other loading bays, or are you concerned that the ordinances might require a second truck well in that building?
That's a really good question, Commissioner Jar. I'm concerned about the logistics of how the other tenants will have a truck. I mean, this is an industrial tenant space. I think it's reasonable to assume every single one of them will need access to loading, deliveries, and unloading activity from the rear of the building. So I just want to make sure it's not merely about striping. Where are these spaces going to be provided so they don't block required emergency circulation right around the building?
Okay, so it's a traffic flow. If there are loading areas around the roll-up doors in the back of the building, they need to be designed in such a way that they don't impede emergency traffic flow or inhibit any of the required parking spaces. Is that correct?
Correct. Correct.
Understood. Great. I have a second question about the green belt for you, if I may.
Yes.
The green belt I understand your point on the green belt to the west. I think that requiring the additional screening is definitely within the intent of the green belt ordinance. The green belt to the north, it looks like there's a 10-foot green belt buffer to the north that butts up against the parking lot to the property to the north. The property to the north doesn't appear to have any green belt buffering at all. That would mean that the available green belt between the two properties would only be the 10 feet provided by this new construction. Do we have any concern about that northern green belt?
Not at this time. I'm actually curious too, wondering why the northern property does not have its 10-foot green belt. I would probably need to, pardon me. Everybody wants to call me at this time. It's work-related call. My apologies. I need to look at the old site plan to find out the building that is located to its north. My only guess is that building probably was already located there when the Schooner Drive Industrial Complex was set up, and that was just carved out as one of the parcels in front, and the other parcels then followed. Because if we had done site plan review and approval, we would have required the 10-foot green belt. I'm assuming it was pre-existing and then the lots were carved out behind it, and that's why it doesn't have the green belt it's supposed to.
Okay, so the thought right now is that it may be a pre-existing nonconformity.
Possible. I believe the applicant providing the required 10-foot green belt would be reasonable because it's between two industrial parcels, and the trees that they're providing will at least soften the appearance, so it's not just an expanse of pavement between two sites.
Got it. Thank you for answering the question. I have one final question while I have the floor, if I may. Mr. Kammer, the swale to the west, on the plans, sometimes that swale looks like a swale, sometimes it looks like it might be a drainage creek bed, and other times it's labeled Edgedale Avenue. What's Edgedale Avenue? Anyone?
Well, as far as I could tell, it's maybe old platted space over there to the east, or I'm sorry, to the west, where I think it's on the other side of the property. But I had the same questions as you, and that's why we brought up the fact that the contours of the site there kind of disappear, or there just needs there looks to be some what they call surface when you take shots, and you get points out there. The surface just needs to be manipulated a little bit to give a better representation of actually what's happening out there. But yeah, as far as the Edgedale Avenue or whatever, I believe that is west of the property that we're worried about.
Yes.
But we would like to obviously maintain all the stormwater drainage of our property or this property on site. And if there is what we always call the overland flow route, if there is drainage coming in from other properties, either to the west or from the north, you can't just block them off. You got to accept them and let them pass through in their natural drainage course. So that is what we are most worried about, and hope that the applicant can give a little bit of clarification on that.
And we should get that clarification before we do before we go for a final review.
Absolutely.
And through the chair, Edgedale Avenue is part of the old school platted subdivision that was done a long time ago. There's some lots that are already divided, but there are other larger parcels that have not been divided. It is, you can see that's the forested area to the west of the property. There's actually, if you look to the further to the west there, you'll see the road that comes down with the homes on it. That's one of the fingers of the sub. And then there's another two roads that actually are mixed in there for platted sub. That's the extent of the development that's taken place there. And while the roads are still, the easements for the roads are there, the roads are not there. So.
Okay. Thank you, Director Best. I appreciate it. And it just was confusing because I was seeing it on, listed differently on the different sheets in the plan. I thought it wasn't clear. So thank you for the explanation. That's all I have.
Great, thanks, Commissioner Jar. Other questions or commissioners, comments or questions? Anyone?
Madam Chair?
Anyone? Yes, Commissioner Cullen.
Yes, I was concerned. Vidya brought up the idea of the colors. Are we going to get a color rendering of what the building's going to be when we come to final site plan? So we see what those colors and what that is going to look like?
Great.
Yes, we will provide that.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Wright. Okay.
And I do have, with regards to Mr. Jar's questions, The property to the north, and you'd have to look at the engineering sheet C103, they actually put a berm on Mr. Patel's property and put pine trees on it. And unfortunately, we have to remove that berm in order for us to do what we are doing. And we will have to obtain permission and an easement, because we're going to have to reshape the northern tenant or the northern property's berm on the east side as we cut off the berm that's on our property. So it's taken a little bit of engineering work to take care of that, and that also impacted the tree count. So that's a little clarification as to between the two properties. On the west, we are proposing, in lieu of a berm, a 6-foot-high privacy fence, and then 45 feet of green belt, and then the double spacing of trees. So, you know, we're providing a significant screen to the residential property to the west.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Wright. Does that answer your question, Commissioner Collin?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions, Mr. Collin?
No, not at this time.
Is there anyone in the audience with questions or comments for this agenda item?
Madam Chair, there is a comment from Stephen Dark in the audience about this project in particular. The comment is, I'm fairly disappointed by the appearance of the building itself. From what I can tell, it basically looks like a glorified pole barn. I'd like to see some more masonry used in the design. So that's our one public comment.
Great, thank you. And I think that also is referenced in the McKenna letter, that we need to see some design detail. All right, I'd just like to add my comments on the concerns about the drainage issue. The Denton drain passes through the Denton community and also the newer developments that are to the east of the old Denton community. We've had a lot of Denton drain issues over the last couple of decades, and certainly we've looked very carefully at all of the developments along Schooner Drive to make sure that they are improving the Denton drain and not just creating a situation where farther up in the Denton Village that we have a continuation of the difficult drainage issues that we already have. That drain drains all the way back to the Smith Farm and up against the Subaru development that we approved a couple of years ago. So it affects a lot of property as well as residents and businesses. So lots of caution and care in making sure that the drainage issues are well taken care of. Any other questions or comments from staff, consultants, applicant, commissioners? Are you ready to take action on the request for preliminary?
Oh, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Jar.
At this time, I would move to grant the applicant Sam Patel on behalf of JSB Builders LLC preliminary site plan approval to construct the 16,280 square foot multi-tenant light industrial building with truck well and related site improvements at the site located to the south of 6032 Schooner Drive, with the tax parcel identification number of V83-01899-003-708, based on the analysis and subject to the conditions detailed in the McKenna letter dated August 30th, 2021, the Fishbeck letter dated September 1st, 2021, and the VBT fire report dated August 20th, 21, noting the feedback and concerns from our chairman about the drainage cautions.
Thanks. We have a motion. Is there support?
I'll support.
Thanks, Commissioner Cullen. And it's a roll call vote, please.
Medina Atchison, Sherry Budd,
Yes.
Callie Barr,
Yes.
Brian Cullen,
Yes.
Jeff Jar,
Yes.
Carol Thompson.
Yes. All right, Mr. Patel and Mr. Wright, you have a preliminary site plan approval and some homework to do. We look forward to seeing you back when you have recommendations to move forward.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you. You too.
All right, we will move to item 2 on tonight's agenda, which is discussion of the Sumter Road Corridor Plan. Planning Commission and Master Plan Consultant McKenna Associates will review a summary of the public input from the July 28th of 2021 Sumter Road Corridor Workshop. The Planning Commission will also be requested to begin considering possible changes to the future land use plan in key sections of the Sumter Road Corridor Study area. We'll start first with presentation by staff and our consultants. Director Power, do you have any comments or advice that you want to give us before we get into the draft?
I do. I think our master plan consultant is out there on I think he's with McKenna Zoom, so we can invite Adam Cook up to speak as well. He'll be doing a more extensive presentation. But what I want to just start this off with is to first thank the Planning Commission and all the members of the community that were able to attend the July 28th workshop at the fire station. I thought it was very productive and I gained a lot of insight from the people that I talked to. So one of the elements of the most significant element of any planning process is to get the input from the community members and stakeholders who are going to be on the ground and helping to steer the direction of the community in the coming years. So that workshop was very important to inform what we do next. We're going to go over those public input results from the workshop and from some of the comments we heard before the workshop. And then, like it was stated in the agenda, we'll ask you as the Planning Commission to start considering some alternatives to the future land use scenarios in some of the key areas that have been teased out of this planning effort. Just to bring people back to kind of the 40,000 foot view before I turn over this magical screen sharing capability to our master plan consultant. I just want to remind the Planning Commission and the public that what we have in place today is a plan from 15 years ago, roughly, that looks like this. And what these colors mean is that where you see the green, we've planned for the traditional rural residential character that many are interested in. And that means housing at a rate of, at a density of 1 unit per acre. It means traditional agricultural uses and a variety of other low intensity uses. When you get into the pink areas up to Spencer Avenue, along Sumter Road and at the corners, and along the east side of the road, this is all what was called local commercial planned land use. And what that means is small scale, traditional retail and service commercial uses. And then north of that point, you see mixed use planned land use that was intended to bring in a variety of uses and start to provide a transitional area into the city of Belleville, but it was undefined. And so there are some of the questions that have been raised throughout this process that we're looking at continually are whether the existing planned land uses you see on this screen are still relevant. And if so, does there need to be some additional definition to them, especially the mixed use planned area? So what we're going to do is present the public input findings, and Adam is going to go over some of the ways that we're starting to think about alternatives based on the feedback that we got, alternatives to this map. And we're going to do that by some graphic examples and some kind of broad brush depictions of what the changes to the map might look like. So it's a first chance to kind of get into the dialogue and give us some additional direction. Without going into any more detail myself, I'll turn this over to Adam.
All right. Thank you, Dan. Thank you for that nice introduction. And thank you, commissioners. It's very good to see all of you again. And to be respectful of everyone's time, I think let's do a share screen here and get into a brief presentation. Okay, it looks like that's working. Dan, can you see that? And everybody else? Okay. So again, we're going to just do kind of a broad overview. I want to do a report out from our public workshop at the fire station back on the 28th. That was a successful event, and I want to thank everybody who took the time to attend. But we really did have some very good dialogue and discussion with pretty good variety of local residents. And so we'll get into a summary of that. What did we hear? Who attended? And so on and so forth. I think, you know, we've talked about this, Dan talked about this in our introduction in terms of project purpose. But we do want to get into the fact that we heard feedback beginning really as soon as this project was announced. So going back before July, going back into the spring, Dan was fielding comments and Matt was fielding comments from residents, which we rolled into kind of our workshop feedback in terms of summarizing kind of the sentiments of the area. And so what are those things that we heard going into the workshop? Predominantly, we want to preserve the rural character south of Hull Road along Sumter. Another major point for feedback was connectivity and safety for all road users along that Sumter corridor, and especially non-motorized users. And so if you've tried to walk the Sumter corridor, which we on the project team now have several times, you know, you find these types of issues, you find inconsistent sidewalks. If you try to bicycle along it, I will, you know, tip my hat to you, because I would want to be a more skilled cyclist than what I am to traverse that safely. And again, we heard that both at the workshop and before the workshop, that just the design of the corridor itself is underperforming. Aesthetic issues. So even though we just had a recent kind of refresh on the asphalt on the corridor itself, that really didn't address the conditions that you see along there. So you have a lot of individual driveways. You have towards the south end, when you get towards Hull, okay, you have a lack of curb and gutter along Sumter. And so you have these kind of informal parking areas also in some cases to the north by Belleville. And so it's an aesthetic issue, but it also creates, it rolls into that safety issue because you're talking about lots of different potential conflict points where you have lots of vehicle movements in and out of these residential properties and businesses. And then, of course, you know, the vacant properties along the corridor being an eyesore, and I'm sure that's no surprise to anybody. What does that suggest? You know, and this is something else that we heard. Does that suggest that retail is always going to be doomed to fail along the corridor, or is it that these properties in particular are just not positioned for the needs of the township residents in the 21st century? The other side, that's kind of a two-sided coin. The other side of that two-sided coin is there are a lot more property owners along the corridor and nearby to the corridor that really genuinely do care about it, care about its future. They don't want to see it written off. They want to see it. They want to see a vision for it, and they want to see that vision articulated and played out in the coming years. And there are successful businesses. There are property owners who care, and those are just two of them. The property there on the west side that was in dilapidated state for many years. It was at one point an insurance office, and that's now been rehabbed. And we've spoken with that property owner and some other people that are very, very positive about the direction that some of these properties have taken. And then we get into the workshop itself. We had really good attendance. We had over 30 people, and those were based on our sign-ins. I want to say that we probably had closer to 40, a little bit over 40, based on my experience doing a number of these things. and walking around the garage where we had the event at the fire station and talking to people, there are always people that slip by the radar and maybe don't make the sign-in sheet. So we had 30 people on the sign-in sheet. I would estimate that it was probably closer to 40, maybe even 45 residents. And we had 7 elected and appointed officials sign in. The overwhelming majority of those that attended lived within 1 to 2 miles. You can see we have our Where Do You Live exhibit, and we asked people who did sign in, we gave them those sticky dots so they could put a dot so we could kind of see the distribution. And as you can see, that is universally south of Belleville, I guess with one exception, south of Belleville Lake. But everybody south of Interstate 94 and 2 residents of Sumter Township attended. And so what feedback did we get at the event? Through our conversations, through what we call the kitchen table map, which is where we have a large scale aerial view of the area understudy kind of laid out on sort of like a kitchen table. And we kind of generate conversation and we make notes. The participants make notes and they're putting them on the map so that they're keyed to a specific location that they're talking about. We had a number of boards up, and the generic question we ask on those boards is, imagine that you return to Sumter Corridor after 20 years, what would you like to see, and what did we hear? Again, a lot of these things, no surprise, they were previewed by the comments we got beforehand, right? Preserve that rural character, not only the character, south of Hall where it's distinctively rural and, you're into the South Side Master Plan that says that character shall remain, but also along the more northern part of the Sumter Corridor as well. There are plenty of moments that still have that semi-rural character, especially there along the west side of the corridor where you've got some almost rural type residential development there. Again, with the mobility, again, with safety, operational improvements along the corridor with the street design, so sidewalks, bike lanes, streetscaping, things of that nature. The grocery store / market / business that will serve our local needs in terms of groceries, that came up a lot. But what format? There's a bit of a debate about that. We had definitely feedback where, the name Kroger came up a number of times, something of that format and level of service. But there were also many people that were willing to say, something that maybe is a little bit more contextually appropriate for the area, but still serves our needs. So I don't think there's necessarily consensus on what format, but most certainly there is consensus about we would like, to have the opportunity to get sort of daily needs that we could walk or bike to, but definitely not have to traverse Belleville and definitely not have to cross Interstate 94 to get them. So when we get into, what is that commercial development going to look like? Again, we talked a few slides ago about the vacancies. And so that prompted there to be sentiment that there should be no new businesses whatsoever on the corridor until the vacant storefronts are filled. But, I think the flip side again to that is maybe it's the fact that those properties just aren't configured for what the market demands in the 21st century. And, we can talk about that more in the discussion. We want to move along with the comments, the recreational opportunities. That's something that came out of the woodwork at the meeting that we hadn't really heard before. Place to, navigate the area via a golf cart or have some sort of a community garden or a nature park or some sort of maybe more programmed facility that has, addresses natural features. We had some comments for, more restaurants in the area, and we had 2 comments about specifically a community targeted at the 55 plus segment of the population. And so, moving on from there, we want to get into those discussions kind of, transformed into, well, what might a vision look like for these various areas? And how do we break down this corridor? And this is something that Dan has been working on very diligently. And we've had a number of really productive discussions as well with Matt Best and then with my project team on this as well and with Vidya. And we've had a couple of residents also chime in on some of these design concepts. I think we had a very productive workshop, and we've also had productive communications since then. And so what we want to do for you tonight is just kind of present some kind of high level general conceptual ideas about where this could go, because, as we've seen, there are a number of challenges, right, with this corridor. And so we'll get right into it. I think we've kind of broken down the way to study this. We've kind of broken it down into 3 kind of focus areas. And so if we think of focus area 1, think of the west side, okay, of Sumter Road, north of Hull. We think of focus area 2 as being the east side of Sumter Road. And of course, we have the jurisdictional boundary, that kind of sawtooth pattern, the zigzag between the township and the city of Belleville. But just for study purposes, we kind of want to think of that as one linear stretch of corridor. And then lastly, focus area 3 would be the area south of Hull Road and approximately 1/4 mile to the east, to the west, and to the south there. Along Sumter. And I should add, just to just articulate a little bit more, that focus area 1, we want to also think about not just the frontage along the west side of Sumter, but the frontage extending back 1/4 mile or potentially beyond 1/4 mile, because we have a number of very long, very narrow property parcels right in that area. And many of those actually do extend back more than 1/4 mile. And so when we think about beginning, how do we define a vision for this corridor? And we think about conceptual frameworks for these various areas. Let's break it down by focus area. So focus area 1, again, we're looking at the west side. And, the conceptual framework for that is, you have, and you can see there in the left image where you can really clearly see the property lines. On the current future land use map, as Dan mentioned, we've got a large area designated as mixed use heretofore, to be defined mixed use. But, the parcel dimensions also kind of play into this a little bit as well. So you have a number of parcels along there that are very long, very narrow. Maybe the front, 50% of them are under active use. The rear 50% or beyond, are not under active use. And then there are further parcels beyond that are not under active use. And so one sort of tenet of this framework involves thinking about what if value were added to those parcels through some means of rear access. And that rear access could consist of a northward extension of Rouleau Avenue, or further to the west, it could consist of a northern extension of Bach Road. And then by creating additional value, by allowing those parcels to, either be potentially split off or at least be developed with access that does not involve doing anything different to the Sumter corridor itself or changing the character of that frontage along Sumter, you could then be able to start seeding in some different uses. So when we say mixed use, and I'll show you some examples here in a second, when we say mixed use, we're not always thinking of mixed use as in, Woodward Avenue in Detroit or something like that. Mixed use can be defined a number of different ways. So in this case, we can, talk about proposed mixed use and still stay true to that spirit of, a semi-rural character in the area, which we did hear, like I said, from, the pretty much the overwhelming majority of those that have given feedback. And so, some of those non-residential uses might include towards the rear, something like artisanal manufacturing. You would still have single-family residential buildings, potentially on any access streets that might cut in to the east and west, similar to what you see currently on, say, Spencer and Montague and Cheney. When we get into it now a little bit deeper, we want to look at kind of defining layers to this. And so kind of layer A, or on this diagram, zone A, would be the immediate frontage there along Sumter Road. And then zone B would be further back to the rear. And then you could even define maybe even a zone C if you were to go further west, between Rouleau and Bach Road. But again, that's where you might gain new rear access to those parcels, start to derive additional value that currently isn't there from that access, and achieve a mix of uses while retaining that semi-rural character. And so, if you were to go forward with this, type of a conceptual framework, how would you do it? One way to do it is to regulate by building type. And so, in a code that would, an overlay code or an overlay zone for mixed use that might have some design-based elements, you could do that. You could define building types and have associated standards with those building types. And that would inform the ultimate character and the ultimate uses that take place in these areas. So very quickly, what are some examples? Okay, pretty simple. Detached garage. When we look at maybe the two layers, the zone A and the zone B, you might see a detached garage. We're all very familiar with that. In zone A, you might see a roadside stand. Now, again, we're saying might because this is very conceptual at this point, but there's already some sort of roadside firewood being offered for sale, and kind of very small scale artisanal uses that we've seen being offered on some of these properties. And so you could potentially find a way to regulate, and as part of this code or part of this overlay zone, an actual roadside stand that would allow you to kind of preserve that character. And again, we're talking very small scale. Now we go further back from the frontage, then you might look at something like a barn. And again, this is just a representative diagram. This is not the actual barn that you would be talking about. But again, it's just the type of building format and the associated uses that might come along with it. Another building type is kind of a flexible one. So we say artisan, studio, craft, culinary, basically a small workshop. When we talk about light industrial, we're talking, this is technically industrial, but it's very, very light industrial, very light footprint, almost, zero nuisance in terms of having, light, noise, odor, the typical types of things that we regulate when we think of, your traditional industrial areas and your traditional industrial districts in a community. We're talking about very light craft-based industrial uses. Another similar use might be a greenhouse. Again, this is a representative image. We might be looking at, a much smaller type of greenhouse, but still something where, that type of semi-rural kind of light industrial activity takes place. So we're thinking about plant cultivation and, things of that nature. Another interesting building, we've got a whole library of these in precedence. Another interesting one is something called a kiln house. And you can look that up if you're, or maybe if you're interested in pottery, that's something that you may be familiar with. But again, that type of a production facility for sort of a light industrial use. And then lastly, something we're probably all familiar with, which is the workshop, which is, basically, a garage that has just a little bit of extra space programmed into it for a taller vehicle or for, again, very light, almost craft-based production going on in there. And so to move on to focus area 2, conceptual framework for focus area 2. Now we're talking about the east side of Sumter. And that has a much different character to it already, just due to the fact that it's been developed. Again, we've got the partnership issue with the city of Belleville, and they would have to work with us, I think very closely on this. Some of these properties are in the city of Belleville, such as the large strip center, that has Dollar Tree in it, but also has a number of vacancies. So the entire eastern frontage would also be designated as mixed use. I think mixed use would actually be a little bit different mix of uses that might involve some very small scale commercial, but also maybe some professional office, maybe some artisanal type of, craft product as well, or perhaps professional office in addition to residential. Again, that would be governed by the same type of building type schedule as we just talked about. Side residential streets that would cut in would allow for single family homes. And then importantly, as a way to solve this problem with access management and with overall appearance and character of the corridor, maybe making use of a parallel street on the east side of Sumter. We call that a slip street. And what that would do is be for, local traffic, not even, local traffic per se, but just building access, site access. The important part is that it would be continuous and that there would be a buffer between Sumter Road proper and this access road or this slip street. And what that would do is maybe enhance that rural character a little bit, provide a little bit of screening for the buildings that would be further to the east, and again preserve some of that rural character. And here's an example of what, street cross section for that might look like. Something that involves a bike path going in there, sort of a 20 feet tree lawn in between those bike paths, and then an access lane with maybe some angle parking, and then you get to the building. So right now we're looking at kind of a chaotic environment with a lot of driveways directly out onto Sumter. We're looking at surface parking with very little buffering onto the street itself. And then beyond that parking setback, we're looking at kind of more traditional commercial and industrial buildings, under this concept. That area would be filled with more of a buffering and more of an organizational aspect to how traffic circulates before you get to those setback structures. Lastly, we want to get into focus area 3. I know I always go a little bit over time, and I do appreciate your time and your patience. And so I've only got 3 more slides to show you. Focus area 3, we've been able to illustrate this a little bit more carefully because, quite frankly, most of the discussion back on July 28th was about area 3, this area on the south side of Hull along Sumter, and what might that look like. And our urban designer, Mike Campbell, was with us on site working diligently at a table and drawing people's ideas out in real time as this conversation is happening and playing out. And most of what Mike drew pertained to this area. And so, we had a lot of material upon which to base some very simple preliminary sketches tonight. And again, these aren't anything final, but this is an illustration of maybe 3 different potential ways that development might proceed in area 3. And so what we're looking at right now is kind of a conventional scenario. When you look at your AG zoning and your rural residential planned or future land use in the master plan, what you're looking at by right is 1 acre lots, 1 dwelling unit per acre gross density. And so if we were to just sketch out what a conventional residential development might look like, it could pretty much look like what you're seeing. Of course, we've got the existing Citgo gas station there, and we've also put some room in for, another small, again, relatively conventional commercial development there on the southwest corner that would take advantage of the sanitary sewer. That also comports with the existing local commercial future land use designation and the local commercial zoning that just covers that immediate area right within the vicinity of the Hull and Sumter intersection. An alternate view would be maybe an expanded area for a larger format store or a larger format use of some sort, be it commercial or be it light industrial. And that's what's represented by that purple square, but we can sketch that out a little bit better. But you get the idea of what that generally would look like in terms of a pretty conventional by right development. Now, if we move this more into the thought process of what might a planned residential development look like. So something more along the lines of what you see further to the west along Huron River Drive and in some other parts of the township. If you were to start thinking towards, okay, if we're going to develop this area for residential, but allow for some open space to be retained, what are some different ways to do that? And so one is the sort of PRD kind of scenario where you have greenways programmed in, you have smaller lots, but you're preserving the same number of dwelling units on the same number of acreage. So when we talk about gross density, that's what we're meaning. So we're getting the same gross density, roughly the same number of residential units out of the same amount of land. They're just configured differently. More room is reserved for a little bit of a street network and as well a greenway network that, again, preserves a little bit more of that open space. And we can take that one step further and we can talk about what maybe more of a hamlet concept would look like. And this is where a more significant portion of that area is dedicated to agricultural or forest preserve based on what the existing land use is, kept in perpetuity as open space, but in exchange, a more compact development takes place right around those 4 corners. And again, there could be some small scale commercial. There may be more land blocked out in there for commercial. things could look different, but roughly based on that one dwelling unit per acre gross density, this is one version of how that might map out and what those parcels would look like. And so, those are kind of our, I think, our summary points, Dan. And let me know if there's anything that you'd like to add, or if I've overlooked anything before we move on.
Thanks, Adam. There's a lot of information here, and one of the things with the Planning Commission being very good at what they do, which is getting into the details of a site plan level analysis every other week. It's easy to look at these kinds of images and kind of zero in on maybe what you know about those sites, and thinking about the things that may be infeasible about these land use concepts. But I just encourage everybody, first of all, to know that we'll give you plenty of opportunity to kind of sift through this information and give your feedback on it. Don't expect you to have your final thoughts on all this stuff tonight, but also as you're doing that, to pull back and look at this as a concept and as a pattern, and see if the pattern of uses makes sense to you. One of the things that struck me as we started to go through this more was, when you talk about mixed use on a place like Belleville Road, you're talking about a whole other set of uses that makes sense to mix together, as opposed to the kinds of mixing of uses that makes sense for the context of this area. So I guess there are a couple things we wanted to accomplish tonight. One was to articulate the summary of the public input, and we encourage you to ask any questions or make any comments about what you heard about that. But the other is to start synthesizing that input into these land use concepts. As we did that, we started seeing these focus areas pop up. And so you are encouraged to look at these focus areas and share your thoughts on these patterns as you saw them tonight. We want you to consider the existing, what we've already planned for versus the alternatives that Adam has shown. We want you to consider these building forms and land use types. And of course, we'll have further opportunity to go through all of these materials. But just from a quick, well, not quick, take your time, but I want to give the Planning Commission an opportunity to kind of give their initial feedback on the discussion and the presentation from our consultant. And also give our staff and other consultants who are here a chance to speak, as well as take any public comment that we get. So maybe before we go to the Planning Commission, I saw Director Best's hand up for a second.
Through the chair, I just wanted to put together my brief comments about this. This is extremely different than what we had originally talked about looking at doing at this south of Hall Road. And when we initially sat down and said, we have this potential influx of people that need to find space that are light industrial, like they're a mix between commercial and industrial. We need to find these space, potentially find spaces for these people and take advantage of the fact that they're looking for space, but also preserve the green and create buffer between the agricultural spaces of the community south of Hall Road and Sumter Road, where potentially over time you're going to see development pressures potentially come in and change that corridor in an unplanned way. Adam and Dan have worked very hard to take the comments of our residents, our commissioners, our elected officials, and other consultants that they brought in to kind of put together some options. But I think the thing to remember is this is really up to the Planning Commission and the people that you represent. The data that was collected shows that there's a lot of different options out there, and Adam and Dan have put together some really good options based on the comments and the collaborations they've done with the residents who really wanted to have their say. So while this is different than what we initially thought could happen, it's important to remember that as we consider this discussion as we move through, that as the residents made comments, Adam and Dan and their team put that stuff on paper as best as they could, and then actually went back and talked to some of those people and said, what do you think of this? So this is still in the discussion phase. These are just the conceptual options from that initial discussion and the feedback session. So this is your opportunity to ask the tough questions, put Adam and Dan to kind of explain why they did some of the things that they did, or to ask new questions. But this is that opportunity for you to do that. And I thank you for giving us that opportunity. Thank you.
Well said.
So this is the time you can ask questions.
All right, commissioners, consultants, who has some thoughts based on what we've heard tonight?
Madam Chair, one question I would have or would like to find out is why those businesses along that are vacant, why have they failed? What reasons are there that they didn't provide? Because there are some businesses, Martin and Son as an example, are doing very well along there. But why did some of those others fail? Was it improper management? Was it location? Was it advertising? Why is that strip mall there for Belleville have so many vacancies and has for years? That would be a concern before we tried to look at what type of businesses we'd want along there. Wouldn't it be nice to know why the other businesses failed so that we don't run into the same type of problem with vacancies?
Good question. Other comments, other questions?
Chair Thompson, may I respond to that briefly?
Certainly, Mr. Cook, yes.
And Commissioner.
Whoops, excuse me. Let me just say, this is the discussion part of our meeting, so it's a little less formal. So yeah, people should jump in and hopefully, we build off of each other's comments and ideas. But Mr. Cook, I'm sorry I interrupted.
Not a problem. And Commissioner Cullen, I just want to tell, so I hope you're not too excited because I don't have a definitive answer to that, but having worked on a number of market studies, what I can say is that, the presence of, a pattern of business failure doesn't necessarily mean that no business could possibly succeed. And if we were to study that in depth, I think one of the things, that you would do is you would actually go back, and some of this you have to reconstruct through just talking to people in the community. Why specific businesses, what specific businesses were in those spots, and what became of them, how long did they last? And then you sort through that data and you draw conclusions from the pattern. But one thing I can say with certainty is, that the types of spaces in those properties, having gone up there and just kind of looked in the windows and walked around, again, I haven't studied what the asking rents are, and I don't know necessarily, how well those properties are managed. But, based on the way they're configured, based on the size of the individual floor plates, and just basically the overall condition of those properties, they're not very desirable, types of spaces for, kind of a wider range of, commercial businesses. They may have been, at some point in the last, 25, or 30 years, but those really aren't the type of properties that you're seeing a lot of demand and really growth in any community. And so I think, that's one question we would need to answer, right, is to separate out what are the particular factors right along the corridor versus just the general state of those properties and the way they're configured, how large the floor area is, what are the rents, and things of that nature.
Yeah, and I can follow up with that with some comments that were made by residents at the first meeting and the second meeting. A lot of it has to do with something called trip generation. And when you have a long rural corridor without any destinations on it between you and 30,000 rooftops, of a region to get to your commercial core, you have to give them reasons to generate that trip into that area. And quite frankly, that corridor between Sumter and the city of Belleville that's in Van Buren Township just hasn't had a trip generation. It doesn't generate those trips. A lot of people aren't just going to drive into Belleville to get groceries because, oh wait, the grocery store in there, or they're not going to go in. They might go to get, go to a restaurant or to an event, but the day-to-day travel, they're going to want to go, if they have to drive a distance to get somewhere, that the trip generation is going to be, I'm going to go out and I'm going to pick up my groceries, my pharmacy run. I'm going to stop and look at shoes and get paper towel at Target. Not that you need to have those specific businesses, but you have to have that trip generation. And that long distance where there's nothing generating trips kind of is one of the impediments. The second impediment really has been the turnover of the businesses. And as the people who have been residents for a long time in the community, you've seen a lot of those storefronts turn over multiple times. And eventually, when you have multiple turnover, eventually that space, people don't look at that space anymore unless that's why you'll see when somebody has a grand opening, they'll throw the big gorilla up to get attention to their storefront, right? The big inflatable gorilla, and it sits there and does this. Because it has to generate that trip in their mind. That place is open again. So these are two other considerations. The spaces themselves are not that are there now. It's not that they're not perfect for business. It's not what current businesses are looking for when they try to site in an existing space, because they were built for a different demographic and a different business mindset at the time. So hopefully that helps answer that question. And frankly, the trip generation concept was one of the reasons why we wanted to look at the corridor again. So
if I can weigh in, one of the comments that I heard from several residents at the meeting was that the connectivity into Belleville down to the south along the road via sidewalk or bike path, it's not good. And there were people that indicated they would love to take a bike ride and go up to Belleville and stop at the businesses along the road, but it's not really a safe thing to drive along that road. There's no sidewalk. You can't walk on it. You can't take a bike path up it. So just improving that transportation infrastructure, I think, would help a lot and help out the businesses along that corridor through, like Director Best said, trip generation. I think that's something we really want to seriously consider focusing on, is improving that aspect of the corridor. If we let people traverse up and down it more easily, I think it will help the whole area. Incidentally, I had not considered extending Bach Road up to the railroad tracks. I thought that's an interesting idea, and I think that would probably also help some of those more locked-in parcels along there for future development. Hadn't even thought of that. That's a great idea, guys. Good job.
I want to just echo some of the theme of what's been talked about so far. I'm hearing, some businesses have failed, and some businesses also are in need of new space, depending on the evolution of land use in the city of Belleville and in Van Buren Township. There is a need for some of these business and manufacturing uses to find new territory. And so I think that's the task of this plan also, is to make the conditions for new businesses to succeed and new land uses to succeed, and for things to take the place of where some of the old businesses didn't work out, but also to accommodate a variety of different spaces for a variety of different uses that are going to relocate and evolve. So that can be bits and pieces of the manufacturing that you see in some of the concepts from Adam. And it may be that there is still land available on this corridor. And maybe we're hearing pretty strong opposition to growth south of Hull Road, but it doesn't mean that there isn't still land available to position certain types of manufacturing, either at the corner or along the corridor in different forms, maybe in smaller scale. So I encourage us to think about those things. Mixed use doesn't have to just be residential and commercial north of Hull Road. It can be a variety of different operations. And then there also may be an opportunity to use that site at the corner for some of that manufacturing use as well. I don't know if this is a appropriate time. I just want to make sure we give due time to a comment from one of our members of the public in attendance tonight. Just because it is after 9, I want to make sure he knows his comment is heard. Stephen Dark said, when it comes to focus area 3, I really like the second option shown, planned residential with greenways. It's very visually pleasing, and the greenways leave room for the possibility of a golf course or something of the sort to run between the houses, much like many of the subdivisions in Canton. So just want to put that out there as well.
Great.
Hey, Director Power, I would like to point out, I pulled down a copy of the presentation draft just before the meeting. The pictures in the version that I downloaded from the download site don't match the pictures that were on in full screen during the presentation. When I was reviewing it, I had a hard time understanding what the zones were, but they've been fixed. So I think the version that's on the website probably needs an update so that we can study it in more detail.
Absolutely. We're going to, following this meeting, synthesize really all the comments and input material from that workshop, as well as the presentation that we shared tonight, and eventually the minutes from tonight's meeting. We'll have all that in one kind of portal on our Sumter Road website. So, yep, the slides you saw tonight are a little bit more of a focused and accurate representation of what we wanted to show.
Dan, when you were talking about mixed use, and I know that the term zoning wise is mixed use, but we've talked for a lot of years about really developing that concept for Van Buren Township. We put it in the Ecorse Haggerty Corridor Plan, but never really defined it. We tried to figure out how to make it work within campus situations for larger commercial industrial use, and didn't quite figure it out. And I think you really hit on something, that it's not just the mixed zoning use, so residential next to commercial or light industrial, but it's also the building use, to consider what how the parcels are connect to each other, and what that transportation connectivity is, but also how the buildings fit within the corridor. And that then helps us look at what the uses are. So I think this is an opportunity for us to finally begin to nail down, one, what we like and what we think might work, and two, what the need, do some exploration and find out what the need is, so that if we're going to make some of these changes, which are pretty major changes for us, even though it's a smaller part of the township, let's do it really creatively. Let's do it really thoughtfully. And let's begin to answer that question that we've had hanging out here behind us for a lot of years, but never really had the opportunity to put into place. Anyone else at this point, questions or comments?
Madam Chair, I do see a hand raised. There's somebody on a Galaxy phone. So we could bring them in to share their questions or comments.
Great.
Yeah, thank you, Director Power. Whoever's on the Galaxy, you can unmute yourself.
I love that it says Galaxy. I did not know that, but it's Lori Bellamarie. And I have interest in that property that you're speaking of on 3. And honestly, my vision for that is exactly what you guys are saying. All mixed. Do commercial in the front. I love like the manufactured buildings and all that in the front. If you do like, I'm looking at it right now. If you do like a park in the middle, And I'm thinking like 88 acres, 88 to like 100 acres of all just park. And the last couple weeks I've been like running like trails through it, because believe it or not, trails and bikes and parks and all that needs to come into play. The neighborhood, obviously, you know, we need residents, okay? And I get the density, but also I'm a realtor as well. So I know that people are looking for acreage. Like they want an acre with like a detached structure. So I kind of worked it out where it could be at all, with being a mom in mind, with bike trails and everything going through for safety and everything. So I will get a better draft of that so that you guys can like see it and take a look at it, just to have a vision of what I'm thinking.
That would be wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, I'm unmuting myself. Or how do I do that? Unmute me.
Okay, we'll take care of it. All right, Director Power.
Can I add one more thing before we move along? This is also a time where, yes, we've got a lot of great ideas, but if you think this is a bad idea to do anything, it's also the time to say it now, because we're about to get into spending some serious time, effort, and money delving down past the conceptual stage. So if there are concerns or things you absolutely don't want to see, before we send Adam and Dan into the back room not to come out until the plan is done, and we need to make sure that we're not spending something time and effort too. So I think what they've done is great, but if you have serious objections or concerns or something you absolutely don't want to see there, now's the time. Because these guys, I'm going to put them in a back room and they're just going to feverishly work until Christmas Eve when they deliver the plan. So.
Do we have any volunteers from the Planning Commission that would be willing to do some committee work? It might not have to be every meeting, but maybe a chance to sit down with the team and respond to some of the ideas that they've come up with. Any planning commissioners?
Madam Chair, I would like to volunteer for that.
That would be great. Thanks, Medina.
But to respond to Matt Best's request, you know, if anybody wants to say no, I too was at the fire station for that meeting to kind of get input from the community. And I heard some people opposing it. Some people were excited about it. I really like Director Best and Dan wanting to steer what's going to be there versus letting it just happen naturally, because then we could get residents who are unhappy with what ends up there instead of us, the township, the community being in control of what we want it to be. I am open to a lot of things. I would like to ask, Matt was the one who, or I should say Director Best was the one who was looking, trying to help some developers that were looking for light industrial places. Are they still looking, or did they find real estate that they could do their light manufacturing in? Director
After
Best?
the meeting that we had at the Sumter Township Hall, or the fire station, sorry, Sumter Fire Station, a lot of the interest from the business, the light, the super light industrial and the commercial is dried up.
Okay. Did it dry up because of lack of interest? They found other places to go?
I'm not aware that they found any places to go, but it was obvious that the community wanted, from the discussion, it was obvious that the community was going in a direction that was going to prohibit them from moving forward.
Okay.
From their perspective.
I want to know this. You talked about trip generations. With that being said, if we had like the residential pieces that it looks like Adam had created, would that create more trip generations if we don't have businesses on the Sumter corridor? Would that create more traffic going into the city of Belleville up to Belleville Road to go grocery shopping and do the banking? Or would that traffic head towards Monroe? Because meeting some of the residents at the fire station, they said that they went to Monroe. If they're residents of Van Buren or in the Sumter area, I would hope that they would come our way versus heading towards Monroe. But obviously they're heading towards Monroe because that's where they want to shop, because of the businesses are meeting their needs there.
I think, and I'll let Adam chime in too. I think that you'll get more car traffic from the residential subdivision heading both ways. In terms of figuring out where they're going to go, it's still the same issue. You're just adding rooftops. You're not adding places for them to go. Adam?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Matt. When we talk about trip generation, there's kind of two components to it. So rooftops, meaning, households, generate trips, of course. And that's pretty easy. You can look at Google Earth and you can count rooftops and, make, or just look at census tracts, right? And just make a rough estimate of how many full-time residents, are living with direct access to that corridor. And then, of course, based on a concept like the ones we showed or any other concept, you could generate an estimate of how many more. And so this is kind of when we get into a little bit of market analysis married with planning. But you can get a sense of what your captive audience is. Now, there's another component to it, and I think Matt was getting at it, which is this is an area where there's no through traffic. So if we contrast South Sumter corridor with, let's say, Belleville Road. Okay, Belleville Road, the reason that you have Meijer and you have Walmart, Menards, et cetera, that wanted to locate there is because there is Interstate 94 going right through there at that point, bisecting that corridor. And so now that opens that portion of Belleville Road up to, a regional audience. So people from Ypsilanti are coming out to Belleville Road to shop. People in the other direction, people from Romulus, right? People from a much bigger, what we call trade area, now can access that site. So when we're looking at South Sumter, it's not that there is absolutely a market, because people live there, and if nothing else, we all wear clothes, we all eat dinner, we all do, we all have these basic needs that we should have or would like to have in our neighborhood. But it just means that the scale of what's supportable in terms of how many square feet of commercial space just goes down. So for example, when you look at chain retail, they all have kind of floors as to, how many cars, how many trips generated, or how many cars drive by their site a day. And so they're kind of taking into account, okay, we've got a great neighborhood, so we've got that captive audience, but that captive audience just pays our bills. We need those additional trips, people that are stopping here, but they're going from point A, say in Ypsilanti where they live, to point B, say in Romulus where they work, and they're just passing through, but we're in a good spot for them to stop and do their shopping too. And, that's when you start looking at the market for larger format businesses. But I think that, you've got that covered when you're looking at Belleville Road and some of these other areas of the township. I think this is most certainly a market, that's aimed at local commercial and is supportable for that.
And that's why I said I didn't take it all the way back to what Adam did, but that's why I said when people are coming up that corridor, they need to have multiple reasons for coming up. The trip has to be generated by, they're not going to go up to Belleville Road for their errands when they can go down to Monroe or go somewhere else that's easier, where they can get all the things. If they can't get all the things going into the corridor, they're not going to go. Even though they live right there, they will not go. You'll have people drive through Belleville drive through the city of Belleville to get to the Belleville Road corridor to get things, right? But you have to give them a reason to generate that trip that day. So I was like, Yeah.
And you know, I think it's also, if I could just interject one quick thing, it's interesting to hear people driving down to Monroe, you know, via Sumter Road. And I think part of it is the fact that there's this idea that I don't want to wait at the railroad crossing. You know, if it's 5 p.m., I don't want to sit in traffic all the way through Main Street in Belleville. And even if my trip is longer in terms of minutes to get down to Monroe, it's a more pleasant trip. It's not necessarily that the businesses in Monroe are appreciably different from what's in Van Buren Township. They're not. They're really the same businesses. It's just a question of, I'd rather drive 30 minutes to CVS in Monroe County than sit in traffic for 30 minutes to get to the CVS, you know, on the other side of Belleville Lake.
Trip generation.
Well, to Director Best's questioning earlier, I want to give you all an opportunity to let us know if any of this is off the table or if you see fatal flaws in anything we're talking about. Remember that we still have the option of what we have today. We have the alternates that we can start to develop, and then we can have things where you see this in a totally different light and you want to see something different. So what we'll do is to put together this information, to put the summary slides from tonight's meeting on our Sumter Corridor page, and to ask you to start, really critically thinking about the things we've talked about tonight, and let us know your thoughts candidly, and we will come back as we develop this and report back on the feedback that we get. And we'll kind of frame that in terms of the 3 focus areas we talked about tonight, and we will bring this back for further discussion. I know Chair Thompson, you were starting to ask if there was anybody else interested in committee group. Heard Commissioner Atchison.
I'm always happy to volunteer.
That's great. Thanks, Jeff.
I'm happy to volunteer as well.
Good.
Great.
That's
Thanks,
your 3.
Sally. All right, so you got some people you can call in when you have some show and tell before you bring it back to a public meeting. That'd be great. Thanks, everyone.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else on Sumter Road Corridor Plan? Then we'll wrap up with any general discussion and updates. Director Power, you have upcoming ordinance discussions planned for us? We can't wait.
Yeah, that's just a very brief statement that we have some things that we're researching relating to, there's 3 priority topics right now, and then a slew of other things we could look at, but we haven't forgotten that we are tasked with looking at whether we have sufficient coverage for the idea of agricultural tourism in the township, with at least the Buck site being a prominent agricultural tourism provider, but also looking at this in a bigger lens. We also are looking at the pond ordinance that's in our general ordinances and comparing that with some other communities, as well as outdoor dining, which we've been adaptive with in the lens of the COVID pandemic, and our board has taken a proactive stance to encourage outdoor dining and retail, but there are other pieces of our pre-existing zoning ordinance that we may be able to tune up and modernize to allow this to be more of a something that we look at longer term. So those are some of the key ordinance amendments topics that we plan to come back to you with in the coming weeks or months, hopefully weeks.
Great, thank you. We look forward to it. Anyone have anything else under general discussion? No? Lots to think about after tonight. If we have nothing else, is there a motion to adjourn? Anyone?
I move.
Someone?
I'll move.
Great.
I'll
Commissioner
second
Cummings, we have a motion to adjourn. Who supported?
Jar.
Thank you, Commissioner Jar. And we'll just all in favor say aye.
Aye.
And thank you. We are adjourned. Thanks very much to all of our
night.
consultants and staff. Good job.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night,
Night.
everyone.
Yep.
Evening.
Good evening.